Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. Of South America's many unique endemic animal groups, my personal favourite are the Xenarthrans. Being one of the four major lineages of Cenozoic placental mammals, these animals, which include the armadillos, sloths and anteaters, share a number of very striking anatomical traits, including heavily built reinforced vertebrae with extra articulations, either reduced or absent teeth that lack enamel, relatively slow metabolisms, and the lowest internal body temperatures among placentals. Most species also tend to possess strong forelimbs equipped with sharp claws, comparatively poor vision, and limb bones with many muscle attachment sites. Taken together, these traits indicate that Xenarthrans almost certainly evolved from burrowing fossorial ancestors that were adapted for a specialised diet of ants and termites. However, these putative proto-Xenarthrans are currently entirely absent from the fossil record, with the oldest definitive remains attributable to this group turning up in the early Eocene or perhaps late Paleocene deposits at Itaboraí, Brazil. These were attributed to the genus Rheostegotherium, which was already a recognisably modern type armadillo, being a member of the still living family Dasypodidae, which contains the 8 species of the genus Dasypus. This suggests that Xenarthrans were already diversifying in the tropical forests of South America during the Paleocene, although members of the clade Pilosa, which forms the sister group to the armadillos of Cingulata, appears significantly later. The oldest known sloths are known from late Eocene deposits, while anteaters don't turn up until the early Miocene, roughly 25 million years ago. Xenarthrans produced many megafaunal species during South America's period of relative Cenozoic isolation, although none of these impressive forms have survived into modern times. Being the oldest Xenarthran lineage, the armadillos beat the sloths to the punch in this respect, giving rise to the large and herbivorous Glyptodonts. While it was once thought that these living tanks were basal stem armadillos, only distantly related to modern species, genetic testing has revealed that Glyptodonts were true members of Cingulata after all, with recent studies finding them to be part of the diverse family Chamaephoridae. This means that Glyptodonts were close relatives of the living pink fairy armadillos, the hairy members of Euphraktinae, and the naked-tailed Toliputinae. Like all armadillos, Glyptodonts possessed reduced teeth lacking in enamel, short but powerfully built limbs, and dorsal armour formed by osteoderms, plates of dermal bone covered in relatively small, overlapping keratinized epidermal scales. Unlike their living relatives, however, which are mostly insectivores and omnivores, Glyptodonts were obligate herbivores with grooved, ever-growing teeth. While many modern armadillos will sometimes incorporate plant matter into their diets, ancestral Glyptodonts and their also extinct sister group, the Pampatheres, specialised into browsing and grazing forms that were able to achieve very substantial body sizes, with the largest Glyptodont standing about 5 feet tall and weighing up to 2 metric tons. Their skulls were blunt and short-snouted, with deep jaws equipped with distinctive flaring bony flanges extending from the cheeks. Unlike living armadillos, the bodies of Glyptodonts were covered in large, completely immobile carapaces made up of hundreds of bony osteoderms, with the underside of the body and the top of the head also being protected with armour. This biological plate mail could reach 2.5 centimetres or about an inch thick in the largest species, providing very substantial protection from big predators such as forest rarkid terrorbirds, Cebecasuchians and Sporacodont metatherians. All known species also possessed tube-like armour that covered the tail, which in some forms terminated in spiked tail clubs, superficially similar to those of ankylosaurs, and were likely used for similar purposes, mostly in intraspecific combat. Recent studies have found that Glyptodonts originated roughly 35 million years ago during the late Eocene, a time in which ecosystems were beginning to open up as the global climate began to cool. The following Oligocene and Miocene periods would see the spread of both open savanna woodland and grassland, creating the space for large grazing and browsing herbivorous mammals to emerge in South America. Glyptodont remains from the late Eocene and Oligocene are relatively fragmentary and poorly understood, with the bulk of their fossil record occurring from the early Miocene onwards. These herbivorous armadillos can be split into 2 broad groups, with these being the Glyptodontinae, which includes the well-known genera Glyptodon and Glyptotherium from the Pleistocene, which probably originated in northern South America, while the second is the currently unnamed Austral Clade, containing the majority of Glyptodont diversity, which, as the name suggests, probably originated in southern South America. Glyptodontinae is thought to have contained 3 genera, with these including the Miocene and Pliocene genus Boreostemma, represented by 4 species native to Colombia, Peru and Venezuela. However, the remaining 2 genera are far more famous, with these being Glyptodon and the closely related Glyptotherium. The former genus, Glyptodon, was one of the largest members of the whole group, measuring about 2 meters long and potentially weighing up to 2 tons. With a long and storied history, this animal was first scientifically described during the early 19th century paleontology boom. The type genus, G. clavipes, was named by Sir Richard Owen in 1839 and has been the subject of many studies since then, originating during the Pliocene circa 3.2 million years ago and persisting until the end of the Pleistocene circa 11,000 years ago. Glyptodon possessed a wide range, inhabiting much of the Pampas and Andean regions of southern South America, as well as a disjunct population present in Colombia and perhaps Venezuela. The genus was typified by its tall, blunt skull, deep, powerful jaws, and hypsodont, ever-growing teeth, which were well adapted for processing tough vegetation. A fairly adaptable animal, able to thrive in a variety of different ecosystems, Glyptodon has been shown to have been capable of browsing and grazing, consuming a variety of C3 grasses as well as low-growing C4 plants, such as sedges and members of the aster family. The structure of the hyoid bone suggests that Glyptodon had a powerful muscular tongue to aid in foraging, which demonstrates another case of convergent evolution with ankylosaurs. The tail possessed rather primitive osteoderm armour when compared to other Glyptodonts, being spiky and banded while lacking the barbs or bony clubs at the tail tip. This large, slow-moving herbivore lived alongside not only several other species of Glyptodonts, which could coexist due to niche partitioning and different habitat preferences, but also many formidable big predators, such as the pack-hunting canid Protoscion, the enormous short-faced bear Arctotherium angustidens, and the formidable Smilodon populator. However, while occasionally falling prey to these carnivores, isotopic studies have found that Glyptodon was targeted relatively rarely, which is understandable given how difficult it must have been to take down. Once Homo sapiens arrived in South America, it's been demonstrated that this new predator was certainly capable of hunting the giant armadillo, with fossil remains of Glyptodon skulls and carapaces found in Venezuela and the Pampas, bearing signs of human butchery. As with the vast majority of South American megafaunal mammals, Glyptodon died out roughly 11,000 years ago, with the reasons for this extinction still being heavily debated even today, with global climatic changes and human hunting thought to be potential explanations. It was a close relative of the slightly smaller and similar-looking genus Glyptotherium, which can be differentiated by its shorter carapace, longer tail, and different distribution. Originating in the northern half of South America during the Pliocene, Glyptotherium's range encompassed the grasslands and open forests of eastern Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia, with the genus successfully colonizing the entirety of Central America, as well as the Gulf Coast of the United States after the formation of the Isthmus of Panama. It seems to have preferred moist riparian forests and open woodlands close to water sources, similar to the modern capybara or West African pygmy hippo. Additional isotopic analysis of Glyptotherium and the giant ground sloth Eremotherium found that the 2 species have similar isotopic levels to the extant amphibious hippopotamus. Like Glyptodon, the malariform teeth possessed very high crowns that were well suited for crushing and grinding vegetation. The wide range of this animal suggests that it was rather generalistic in habitat requirements, being found in both mountainous and coastal grassland ecosystems. Smilodon may have occasionally preyed on Glyptotherium, based on a skull from one G. texanum individual recovered from Pleistocene deposits in Arizona that bears distinctive puncture marks that best match those of the Machairodontine cat, indicating that the predator had successfully bitten into the skull through the armoured cephalic shield. The Glyptodont was a juvenile with a still developing head shield, therefore making it far more vulnerable to the cat's attack. It appears that the genus was also targeted by humans. In 2022, a host of fossils of G. cylindricum were described that had been collected from several sites in Falcón, northern Venezuela, that dated to the late Pleistocene. Among these were 4 skulls that showed signs of butchery with stone clubs or choppers. All specimens had their jaws removed, possibly so that the hunters could gain access to the masticatory muscles and the tongue, both of which were notably large and meaty in Glyptodonts. The youngest verified remains of the genus from North America date to circa 23,000 years ago and were found in Texas, although it's also been proposed that Glyptotherium may have survived until the end of the Pleistocene in the humid forests of the Gulf Coast. In South America, the genus survived until circa 16,000 to 14,000 years ago, with human hunting and the impact of the Younger Dryas cold interval seen as potential factors in its extinction. All other Glyptodonts have recently been classified together in a so-called Austral Clade, originating in the Pampas region of southern South America. All of these austral genera remain endemic to the continent and did not spread north during the Great American Interchange. This group is easily recognisable by their fully fused tail armour, with the tail tip often forming a spiked bony club. The most basal forms from the early Miocene, such as Propaleohoplophoros, what a mouthful, lacked this trait and were notably small in size, with this genus being less than a metre long and standing just 1.5 feet tall. The clade diversified as the Miocene went on, although there is little information about these genera available online. The Pliocene and Pleistocene species are far better represented, with these splitting into two main lineages, with these being Daedicurus and its relatives, and Hoplophoros and its relatives. Perhaps the most famous member of the whole Austral group is Daedicurus itself, thanks to its starring role in the Sabertooth episode of Walking with Beasts. This was one of the largest Glyptodonts, with an average height of 1.5 metres or 4 feet 11 inches, and an overall length of around 3.6 metres or 12 feet. The most notable features of this animal were the high domed carapace and elongated tail, equipped with a nasty looking spiked club at the tip. Damage to the body fossils of Daedicurus indicate that this weapon was mainly utilised in intraspecific combat, perhaps during the mating season. The tail could be swung at up to 40 km an hour or 25 miles per hour, and was capable of inflicting significant damage on anything with which it made contact, whether that be another Glyptodont or a predator that got too close. This may mean that males were significantly bulkier and more heavily armoured than females, although there is little direct evidence to support this. Originating roughly 2 million years ago during the early Pleistocene, Daedicurus inhabited the relatively cold and humid Chaco-Pampean plains of northeastern Patagonia, where it bulk fed on low-growing grasses, as demonstrated by the structure of its teeth and the broad width of its muzzle. Its large and muscular tongue may have aided in the processing of food in order to compensate for the animal's narrow gape and relatively weak chewing muscles. Given the strength of the limb bones and long counterbalancing tail, Daedicurus may have been able to stand on its hind legs for brief periods, which is a trait seen in many other Xenarthran species. It was once thought that this genus may have been the youngest of all Glyptodonts, potentially surviving the end Pleistocene extinction event and persisting into the Holocene as recently as 7,000 years ago at the La Moderna site in Argentina. However, later studies have questioned these Holocene dates, suggesting instead that the genus probably died out during the late Pleistocene around 12,000 years ago. Other late surviving Glyptodonts included the genus Hoplophoros and its close relatives, slightly smaller than Daedicurus and possessing a shorter tail and a more rounded carapace. Hoplophoros also had a more northerly Pleistocene range, with fossil remains having been recovered from Brazil and possibly Bolivia. It was a close relative of the genus Panoptus, which was comparable in size but possessed a longer tail, equipped with a variety of bumps and bosses that ran along its length. Native to the open savannas and grasslands of eastern Brazil and Patagonia, Panoptus had hyoid bones that were longer and more gracile than those of Glyptodon, suggesting a longer and more flexible tongue. Meanwhile, the genus Neosclerocalyptus was rather small for a Pleistocene Glyptodont, measuring just 2 metres or about 6.5 feet long. Native to the southern cone of South America, this animal favoured colder and drier ecosystems than other members of the group, as indicated by the strong development of the front nasal sinus, which helped the genus to breathe more easily in dry and cold environments. The jaws were relatively narrow and slender, while the teeth were not as high-crowned compared to other Glyptodonts, suggesting a more selective mixed feeding diet of both grasses and softer plant material. Given its comparatively small size and lighter build, weighing about 360 kilograms on average, has been found to have actually been capable of running like modern armadillos, albeit quite slowly. All of the aforementioned species in the Austral Clade died out at the end of the Pleistocene between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, as did all Glyptodonts and their smaller Pampathere relatives. As with the demise of all the Pan-American Pleistocene megafaunal mammals, the reasons for this abrupt extinction have been much debated. Given that Glyptodonts seem to have preferred cool, dry and open ecosystems, it's been suggested that the warmer and more humid climatic conditions that emerged at the very end of the Pleistocene were detrimental to the group. This coincided with the end of the Antarctic cold reversal, a cooling period earlier and less severe than the Northern Hemisphere Younger Dryas. It has also been argued that human hunting may have played an important role in the extinction of Glyptodonts, with the spread of fishtail projectile points at several megafaunal fossil sites indicating this. It's probable that some combination of both factors were involved, and I personally favour the idea that human hunting added pressure to animal populations that were already stressed by a warming climate and habitat changes. I'm certainly not an expert on this, however, and debates about this subject are likely to rage on into the future. Sadly, all 7 late Pleistocene Glyptodont genera vanished at this time, never to return, alongside all of the weird and wonderful megafaunal Xenarthrans. Thanks for watching, everyone. The next episode will be focusing on the relatively poorly known Cretaceous dinosaurs of Appalachia, so until then I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.